If you don't have a Bitcoin strategy, you'll be left behind and obsolete in 10 or 20 years. Dr. Jeff Ross, the hedge fund manager, is now talking about how this Bitcoin bull run is going to surprise a lot of people. He's saying that you shouldn't rely on common price models because Bitcoin can really surprise us on the upside. He talks about $1, $457,000. He's breaking down the price target and discussing the power law and the diminishing returns theory, which suggests that the cycles keep decreasing in terms of returns. With increasing market capitalization, we're making less and less profit on our Bitcoin gains. He talks about the Bitcoin timeline and why it can be very, very risky to sell Bitcoin. That with increasing market capitalization, we're making less and less profit on our Bitcoin gains. He discusses the Bitcoin timeline and the risks of selling it. Then he explains MicroStrategy's superior strategy and how its price will escalate in the future. But first, let's look at MicroStrategy and why MicroStrategy has a superior strategy here. He clearly explains how MicroStrategy will continue to escalate massively in price in the future. Check it out. The whole thing is translated.
Because they have this core of Bitcoin, this wealth of Bitcoin assets, they can spin off things like convertible debt and debt reforms. And so, for the first time, debt markets can now invest in Bitcoin. And I know you probably know this too, but the Bitcoin convertible debt and these bonds have massively impacted regular bonds. So everyone who, now I'm just getting excited. Yeah, just imagine that, or you're a kid working for some boring old bond company and you can only invest in bonds. And you're thinking, great, we're going to make 4% this year. Super low volatility because you have to have low volatility. Everyone's talking about how great it is. But they're getting Bitcoin, right? And so they go to their annual boss and say, hey, I think we should get Bitcoin because our results are bad and we're actually losing purchasing power every year due to inflation. And they say, well, we can't do that. And what did Saylor do? He says, hey, I've got an offer for you. I'm going to give you access to Bitcoin. I'll give you access to Bitcoin, but with much lower volatility. So if Bitcoin has a volatility of around 60, we will lower the volatility for you. Let's say 10% or 15% or somewhere in that range, and we'll limit all your risk. What Saylor is basically saying is, I'm going to take on all the volatility or almost all of it on your behalf and give you as much of the profit as possible. Even if the stock is likely to go up here, you'll go here, but without the downside risk. And for a bondholder, that's like a miracle. Even if the stock is likely to go up here, you'll go here, but without the downside risk. And for a bondholder, that's like a miracle. It's like the best product you can imagine. Because you're thinking, are you kidding me? I could get a return of about 60% in a year or two with no downside risk, all day long. And that's why when Saylor rolls out these products, they're not just subscribed to right away, but they're also massively oversubscribed. So he could say, I'm going to offer 800 million. And so, to be honest, he gets offers of about 1.2 billion. They're oversubscribed. And I just think he's going to keep doing that over and over because the demand in the bond market and on Wall Street for these kinds of products, where you can basically adjust your volatility, up or down, is insatiable. And I think that makes MicroStrategy such an amazing product. The demand for Bitcoin is insatiable. And I think that's what makes MicroStrategy such an amazing product. And I get it. Or it's a centralized honeypot. There are downsides. There are huge risks involved. I always tell everyone that the best thing you can do is just own Bitcoin and keep it in cold storage, get it off the exchanges and out of the traditional financial system. But people should be cheering him on at the same time. I think every single CEO, founder, and CFO of a public company should do exactly what he's doing. I really do. And I think if you don't do that, you're going to be left behind if you don't have a Bitcoin strategy. Even if it's as simple as just buying a little bit and investing some of your extra money in Bitcoin. 2001. If you don't do that, you'll be left behind and you'll be obsolete in 10 to 20 years.
So this is a very clear warning. Anyone who's not in Bitcoin here is going to be a massive loser in the future. You really need to think about whether you want to be among the losers or if you want to be among the winners. Michael Saylor also says that anyone who isn't saving in Bitcoin here is poor, like people who, for example, in fiat currencies. And here, too, he clearly addresses the problem that most of them, let's say, do not have small investors, but rather asset managers. And that's always the volatility. Volatility is manageable with a long horizon, but crucial for short-term management. MicroStrategy's products are essential for pros. But if you're managing assets for others and the investment horizon is sometimes only 1 or 2 years, then you need to make sure you can handle that volatility. And that's why these investment products that MicroStrategy is bringing to the market are truly worth their weight in gold. especially for professional investors. And now Jeff Ross is actually going to talk about the power law model. Here you also need to understand that when he later mentions the power law, it actually means power law. That's just a poor translation from the AI. And he's talking about his price target in US dollars. Super important. He's not assuming that we're going to have diminishing returns, meaning decreasing returns, but rather that we might actually push this cycle much harder than the last one. He says the last cycle was somewhat manipulated, but just take it in for yourself. Bitcoin is going to surprise a lot of people.
Prices have crashed. Everything has fallen. That was tough. I think those were all very unusual years for Bitcoin. I think we're back on a more normal schedule now. I think Bitcoin is going to surprise a lot of people this time around. I'm listening. First of all, there are these, the power laws that are floating around. I'm generally a fan of the Power Law 2021, but the guy who keeps pushing it and talking about it all the time, Giovanni, whom I think is great, we have personality differences, but I think he's a nice guy, and that's okay. He really advocates the theory that we're going to see declining peaks in the future. And there are other people talking about it, and I think a lot of folks are getting misled by that. I see people on Twitter, even on Easter, we're getting little Twitter screenshots from folks talking about how the peak has already been reached. Don't buy it at $1. That's it. We're done with this cycle. I couldn't disagree more. I think those people are crazy. I think they don't know what they're talking about. By the way, not Giovanni. I'm just talking about the people who are saying that we've hit this peak at $1 and that we're heading into a recession. So there are a few different schools of thought, and we're going to talk about both. Next, I'm going to talk about the recession. So we have declining peaks first. There was a declining peak in 2021, but I argue that was just a coincidence. So in 2021, I think the people who believe we're going to have this lower peak, I think they're saying something like, maybe, somewhere, in between. I guess they'll sell at the peak, and maybe think they're right for a month, and then it'll just take off again and go even higher. So, could be 475. Look, I don't know, okay. I have no insight into what it's going to be. I just think that would be about where it was in 2021. It was basically a straight line for its peak compared to 2017 and compared to 2000. My 13th area is actually very similar to Jackson Mahler's. I heard him talking the other day. He has exactly the same range as I do, which is from $0 to $1 million. People think you can't have ranges like that, but I'm like, this is Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin is crazy, it's super volatile. I wouldn't be surprised if it goes somewhere between $0 and $1 million. Could even rise above 1 million, but I think that's the most likely target for me. I also have the fourth quarter of 2025 as my target. Could go beyond that based on what I see, but I'm just sticking with it. Those are the predictions I've made over the last 2 years, and I'm sticking to them. 54,000 in the fourth quarter of 2025. And then the other point I want to bring up is that these people who say we've already hit our peak and that we're going to fall again, there are a lot of people, and for whatever reason, they're Gen X economists and traders. And I'm Gen X, I can say that I'm right in the middle of Gen X. They're driving people crazy, saying we're at this historic peak like in 1929 or 1999, and we're on the brink of a massive, massive recession. And we're going to have a deflationary crash where stocks and Bitcoin are just going to plummet and get wrecked. And that's how it is with oil. This is literally worse than 1929. I think they're wrong. I'm looking at this, I'm dealing with macroeconomics. I run a macro hedge fund. It's a multi-strategy macro fund. I couldn't disagree more. We're all looking at the same data. I think we're just in the early stages of a new economic cycle. It's actually a hassle, and we can talk about it if we want to. Or we don't have to talk about any of that, but I think we're in the early stages and that the economy is actually going to be pretty good by 2025, which makes me very optimistic. So let's get back to what you're talking about. I'm optimistic, just like you. I think 2025 is going to be a good year. As for the price, I just want to remind people, even if we're in a bull market, I just want to remind everyone that even if we're in a bull market, and I officially declared that I've switched from a bull crab market to a full bull market. I said around Michael Jackson's birthday, so late August. In 2024, that's when I made the switch, and I haven't looked back since. I think the price was around that back then. During bull markets, it is quite normal to have declines of 20% to 30%. That's just part of the game. So when we have these big jumps, I always tell people, just imagine the price being 30% lower in a week. How would you feel? So keep those things in mind. If we rise to, say, just $1 in the next few weeks, which is kind of my short-term goal by the end of December, I wouldn't be surprised if we then drop to maybe $1 2001, or even something like that, and then we kind of start taking off again. So mentally prepare yourself for these declines. That doesn't mean it's over. It doesn't mean the doubters are right, the recession followers were wrong. It's just a normal, typical pullback in a bull market. Absolutely.
Cycle's not over yet. Jeff Ross, who is ultra bullish here, says very clearly, the cycle is not over yet, we will still rise massively. If you're selling right now, you might be caught off guard. You really have to look at the whole picture critically. So he's super bullish right now, and I'm also feeling ultra bullish. But really, make your own picture here, compare different statements, and then come to your own worldview, your own view on Bitcoin. That means everyone has a certain picture in their head. Some people have the idea of diminishing returns in mind, for example, like the power law. Other people have this exponential picture in mind, like Dr. Jeff Ross, who just assumes that this cycle is going to be massively stronger than the last one. And you really need to create your own picture here. Jeff Ross, who simply assumed that this cycle will be even stronger than the last cycle. And you really need to create your own picture here. You really have to find out which model makes sense for you, or even better, you just forget about the whole thing, you just get on with it, you don't even think about buying, selling, whatever, you just get on with it, and then in the end such models and such price calculations are just brain games, I would say. You can think about it, maybe even have a philosophical discussion about it, but in the end, it doesn't really affect your buying decision because you're just holding through and not trying to trade back and forth. Definitely let me know down below what you think about Jeff Ross. Is he being too bullish, or could I agree with his statements? It was also exciting to hear the assessment regarding MicroStrategy, and if you want to buy Bitcoin now, I'll drop a link to 21 Bitcoin down below. The easiest way to buy Bitcoin in Europe, suitable for beginners and pros alike, is that there are savings plans available, you can set up auto wallet transfers to your hardware wallet, and limit orders are also possible now. So, there are a ton of features here at 21 Bitcoin, and the best part is it's Bitcoin only, no shitcoins, just Bitcoin. With the code BitcoinHotel, you can get up to 20% off the fees here. See you, take care, peace out, usn't.